A man drives into a quiet retirement community in Henderson, Nevada. He parks his car, gets out, and walks away. There's no sign of a struggle, no clear trace of where he went. He crosses the street like he knows exactly where he's going. And then, he's nowhere. There's no obvious reason for him to be there in the first place. It should be explainable. It isn't. The deeper you look into the Steven Koecher case, the less it looks like a random disappearance, and more like he walked into something he didn't fully understand. For more true crime content like this, feel free to like and subscribe. Misery does tend to love company. In the LDS faith, there's a belief that families are eternal, not just for this life, but forever. You don't just find someone, you find the person you'll be with for eternity. Getting it right is everything. Steven believed that, and at 30, he still hadn't found it. At the same time, he didn't want a small, predictable life. He wanted to travel, see things. That's what took him to Brazil on his mission. He learned the language, spent time among the people. One of 5 siblings, a close family, the kind that stays involved. He was raised in the LDS church, didn't drink, smoke, or gamble. But he wasn't stiff. He was fun, spontaneous. He loved kids, and he had a creative side. He drew, played guitar, wrote music. There's actually a recording of him performing one of his songs.
It's been 10 days. It's never gone away. I don't wanna hurt you, but I just can't see this ending.
That's Steven. For him, earning a forever family meant being able to provide, so he does what he's supposed to. He comes home, earns his degree, gets into writing. He starts at the local paper, where his father is an editor. Steven didn't want special treatment. He even wrote under a different name. He doesn't mind the work itself, but the overnight shifts, they weren't exactly great for his social life. He also just didn't enjoy living in Salt Lake. In 2009, he makes a change. He moves to St. George. Better weather, strong LDS community, a chance to start fresh, maybe gain a little independence. After moving to St. George, things didn't work out how Steven had hoped. He finds a job with Matchbin. It doesn't last long. The company lets him go, saying he just wasn't a good fit. With the recession, it's hard to find anything stable. He picks up part-time work handing out flyers. It isn't steady, and it doesn't pay much. His dating life wasn't going much better. Friends would later say he was trying, meeting people, but nothing ever seemed to stick. He's active in a singles ward, but being 30 in that environment, that can come with a kind of quiet pressure. Around him, people are moving forward, getting married, starting families. And for Steven, it just hadn't happened yet. He kept trying, but by December 9th, something starts to give. Steven had used his father as a reference on the room he rented. When rent went unpaid, that's exactly who the landlord called. Steven is behind on 3 months' rent, around $1,500. and he's not returning his landlord's calls. It catches his father, Rolf, off guard, because as far as his family knew, everything was fine. When his father calls, tries to talk to him, even offers to help, Steven's reaction isn't what you'd expect. He becomes defensive, downplays the situation, says he'll handle it himself. He says, "Oh, Dad," and hangs up, which, by all accounts, was completely out of character.
I keep my eyes up, still I feel small. If I miss this turn, I miss it all. Don't know where
The next morning, December 10th, Steven just leaves town. Early that morning, he gets in his car and drives right out of St. George. He doesn't tell anyone where he's going. In fact, no one even knows he's gone. A string of gas station stops gives us a rough idea of his route. By 6:45 that morning, he's already in Salt Lake City, stopping for gas. At 9:45 a.m., he stops again, this time in West Wendover, Nevada, right along the border. This is his last confirmed stop before Ruby Valley. He's heading west. Based on that route, he should have arrived sometime around 11 a.m. He doesn't get there until 2, 4 hours, completely unaccounted for. When he finally does show up, it's in Ruby Valley, Nevada, at the family ranch of Anne-Marie Neff, a woman he dated briefly. And I mean briefly, just a few dates. Now things get harder to explain, because she didn't even live there anymore. She was in Salt Lake City, and Steven knows that. He'd already been in Salt Lake earlier that morning, so if he wanted to see her, he already had the chance. Instead, he keeps on driving another couple hundred miles. He doesn't call ahead. He doesn't reach out to her at all, even though they're still connected on Facebook. When he gets there, her parents invite him in for lunch. He stays a couple of hours. By all accounts, nothing seems off. He's polite, normal, but what he tells them doesn't hold up. He says he's on the way to Sacramento, California, just passing through on his way to visit family. Says he's a little concerned about the weather and whether he'll be able to make it. The problem is, none of that checks out. Steven has no family in Sacramento. Ruby Valley isn't on the way there. The weather wasn't preventing travel that day. The explanation he gives just doesn't make much sense at all. Anne-Marie would later talk about the visit herself. On her Facebook, she wrote, "I met Steve a couple of years ago in my ward in Salt Lake. He had come out to my family's ranch in Ruby Valley before with a group for a cattle branding. My mom told me he stopped by again, this time on December 10th around 11 a.m. I wasn't there. I was living in Salt Lake City at the time and didn't even know he'd come until the next day. He asked if I was home, and when my mom told him I wasn't, she still invited him in for lunch. He stayed a couple of hours, said he was on his way to Sacramento, and that he was living in St. George, working a window washing job. I personally didn't have any contact with him about this. This is just what my mom told me after the fact. Our thoughts and prayers are with him." At 3:44 p.m., while heading back towards St. George, he answers a call from his sister, and he doesn't mention any of it. Not where he is, not that he left the state. He just talks to her like everything's normal. After that call, he just keeps on driving. By 4:40 that afternoon, he's back in Salt Lake City, stopping for gas. Less than an hour later, at 5:25, he stops in Springville. By 6:56 p.m., he's on the phone with his mother. Nothing about the conversation stands out to her. She describes him as upbeat and excited for Christmas. She gently brings up his rent, and during the call, she deposits $500 into his account. The entire time, he never tells her where he is. She believes he's in St. George. In reality, he's still on the road. Later that evening, he stops in Nephi, Utah. A small meal at taco time. By 11:13 that night, he finally makes it back home. In a single day, Steven drives over 1,090 miles for what amounts to lunch.
If you ask me in, I'll play it cool. I'll make it look like a normal move. Just a surface smile, I'll wear it for a while.
The next morning, Friday, December 11th, Steven wakes up, and it seems like just another normal day, which after everything we just saw, is a little difficult to reconcile. He spends part of the day working, handing out flyers. While he's out, he comes across two sisters, around 10 and 12 years old. They'd accidentally locked themselves out. Their mother isn't home and they don't know what to do. Steven lets them use his cell phone to call her. When she doesn't answer, he stays with them for over an hour, until he's able to find a neighbor who can help. It's a small moment, but I think it says a lot about who Steven is. Later that day, he goes to church, helps set up chairs for a Christmas party. He also talks with his bishop. The conversation turns to work. The bishop offers to help him secure a job that could start in January. Steven seems genuinely interested, optimistic. By the end of the day, everything about Steven points in one direction, forward, not someone about to disappear.
When the dark comes down and the world goes thin, I'll turn this wheel and I'll go again.
On December 12th, Steven is right back on the road. At 9:19 that morning, his phone pings 80 miles from his apartment in Overton, Nevada. An hour and a half later, he's already back in St. George. Whatever this was, there's barely enough time for him to have done anything that would explain the drive. 160-mile round trip for no clear reason. Later that day, he heads out again, this time toward Nevada. At 5:04, he stops at a convenience store, gets gas, picks up a few snacks. On its own, nothing strange about that. But across the full day, this is the second time he's crossed state lines. Utah to Nevada, then back again, because after Mesquite, he turns around and drives all the way back to St. George. That night, at 7:58 p.m., after a 3-hour gap, he goes to Kmart. And after everything we've just seen, this feels almost normal. He spends about $10, buys a baby bib for his brother's infant, and a box of frosted Christmas sugar cookies. The kind of things you pick up when you expect to be there for the holidays. On one hand, he spends the entire day driving back and forth across state lines, and later, he's shopping for Christmas like everything's fine. Around 10 to 10:30 that night, after another gap, his neighbor, John S., sees him pull into the driveway. He goes inside. 20, maybe 30 minutes later, the car is gone again. Cell data places him near the home at 11:02 p.m., checking his voicemail. He's already spent the day driving. It's late. And now, less than a half hour after getting home, he's back out again. After that, his phone goes quiet. Nothing until 8:52 the next morning.
and the tiny quiet beats. But the day into, I was still right there with you. Then I wasn't anymore. One small turn of the wrist, one plain word in the air.
December 13th, 8:52 a.m. There's movement again. From around 10:30 the night before until now, we have no idea where he was. Steven checks his voicemail. Right around that same time, he gets a call from his bishop, Greg Webb. Webb had gone to Vegas for the weekend. He was heading home. He didn't think he was going to make it back in time for a meeting at the ward. He calls Steven, asks if he can cover for him. Steven tells him he's in Las Vegas too, that he'd head back if Greg needed him to. Greg tells him to do whatever he needs to do, and that he'll head back himself. A little over 2 hours later, at 10:53 a.m., Steven gets another call, this time from the ward clerk. He asks if Steven can include a notice about a basketball game in the church announcements. Steven says the same thing. He's in Las Vegas and won't be attending the service. While all of this is happening, his phone is moving. During the first call, the phone pings near Sloan, Nevada, just outside of Vegas. During the second, it pings right along the 215, on the edge of Henderson. Shortly after that, it pings again, near Bermuda and Cactus. Even across those two calls, hours apart, he doesn't move very far. Then there's a gap. 45 minutes unaccounted for with no indication of where he's going or why. Around 11:30 a.m., the stake president tries to call him. This time, Steven doesn't answer at all. It goes to voicemail. The phone is still active. At 11:54 a.m., a surveillance camera captures his car. It turns into a quiet cul-de-sac on Savannah Springs Avenue. Nothing about the scene stands out. It's a normal residential neighborhood. After parking, he stays inside the vehicle for exactly 6 minutes. From 11:54 until 11:59, nothing happens. Then, at precisely 12 p.m., the door opens. Steven steps out. He's dressed in a light-colored dress shirt and khaki pants, carrying what looks like a folder under his left arm. He closes the door and begins walking east, towards Evening Light Street. His pace is steady, purposeful, but not in a hurry. After turning on to evening lights, he crosses over to the even-numbered side of the street, like he knows where he's going. He appears again, briefly, in the reflection of a vehicle. Then he continues forward and walks out of frame. That's the last confirmed sighting of Steven Koecher, at least on camera. His phone, however, doesn't disappear. Not yet. It stays on for nearly 3 days, and during that time, it keeps moving. After 12, nothing, until late afternoon. At 4:36 p.m., the phone connects to a tower about 20 minutes away, northeast, further into the city. Around 6:30 p.m., another ping, this time in Whitney Ranch, only about 9 minutes away from the last ping. Not far or fast, but it's moving. Overnight, there's nothing again. Early the next morning, December 14th, at 8:18 a.m., a text comes through. It's from his landlord. "Are you going to be able to pay some rent today?" An hour later, the voicemail is tracked from the same area, still further north. Still there, still on. Then, it stops. Through the 15th, the phone keeps connecting to the same tower. No movement, just presence. Until the evening of December 16th, around 5 p.m., the final signal.
The door shuts soft, I feel the whole house shift. Little cracks in the air, and I can't fix this. I can't fix this. When you go quiet, puzzle pieces out of place. When you go
When Ralph got home on Tuesday, December 17th, the house was completely dark. For a moment, he thought nobody was there. When he saw the light from his wife's phone glowing in the living room, Steven's mother, Deanne, was sitting on the sofa, face lit up by the screen. She didn't look up when he walked in.
What happened?
He asked. Instead of answering, she pressed play. The voice on the message was calm and detached. A Henderson police officer. He was explaining that Steven's white Chevy Cavalier had been sitting abandoned in a cul-de-sac in Sun City Anthem for days. Ralph listened without moving. Somewhere in the house, the refrigerator hummed. Otherwise, there was no sound at all. When the message ended, Deanne replayed it. Then again. A few hours later, Ralph was driving through the desert toward Nevada. Ralph pulls up to Sun City Anthem. You know the kind of neighborhood where everything looks just a little too similar. Single-story homes, smooth stucco, all sun-bleached into the same pale colors. HOA neat, quiet, in that almost artificial way. It's the edge of Henderson, where the desert just presses in. At the end of one of those streets, in a cul-de-sac, sits Steven's car. Not in front of a house, not pulled up like someone visiting, just off, alone. It's quiet, not completely silent. It never is. The faint hum of traffic way out past the sound walls, the dry buzz of cicadas in the heat, that still Nevada air that seems to swallow everything. And just his son's car, sitting there, like it doesn't belong. For a second, he just stands there, then unlocks and opens the door. Inside, everything is normal. Too normal. There are flyers for the window washing job, scriptures on tape, receipts, gas, food, a coat, blankets, pillows, a small shaving kit. That stands out, given that overnight stretch no one could account for. There's the Kmart bag with the Winnie the Pooh bib, and Christmas cookies still inside. In the trunk is where it all starts to sink in. Dozens of job applications, not just tossed in there, organized. Copies of applications he'd already submitted. Steven was keeping track of everything, where he applied, when. He was really trying. The car starts fine. It still had half a tank of gas. There was no reason to leave it there. So why here? In a neighborhood where it doesn't belong. Did he come to meet someone? Was he carjacked? His passport isn't in the car. Did he go somewhere? Maybe for a job? Or did something happen to him?
There's a trail, not a lock, not a key. Maybe it comes in pieces, and it's waiting in me.
They bring in dogs, both drug sniffing and scent tracking. By then, The car had been sitting in the open heat for days. If there was a scent, it's likely gone. They don't run forensics. There's no sign of foul play. And that shapes everything. From their perspective, Steven is likely still in Vegas, maybe with friends, blowing off steam. That assumption, it's coming from law enforcement, not his family. Desperate for answers, Rolf canvasses the neighborhood where Steven's car was found. At the very first house, he finds something. Security cameras. The timeline sharpens. They see the car pull in, and minutes later, Steven walking away. The image isn't clear, not enough to be certain. His family knows. The build, the clothes, the way he moves, and the folder tucked under his arm. Next, the family searches Steven's apartment. What they find doesn't look like someone who planned to leave. His clothes are there, his laptop, his charger. Nothing about it looks like someone who planned to leave. They find notes, church responsibilities, appointments, plans. In his journal, it's the same. Organized, lists, goals. He writes about work, trying to get back on track, about finding a girlfriend in the new year. Even when he writes about his problems, it's not hopeless. It reads like someone actively trying to fix them. Eventually, they find his passport. His parents would later say, that moment knocked the air out of them. Some part of them had held on to the idea that maybe he'd gone somewhere. Now the question isn't, why did he leave? It's, why didn't he come back? After that, they check his laptop, looking for anything that might explain Henderson. Emails, messages, contacts. But that search has limits. Steven didn't have Wi-Fi. He used the library. If he made plans, they might not be there at all. After 2 weeks with no leads, the family pushes further. They arrange to have his face printed on milk cartons. Before it goes out, the dairy checks with Henderson police, confirming he's still officially missing. And that's when things turn around a bit. It becomes clear this isn't a typical Vegas disappearance. His family doesn't believe he left. They believe something happened. After that, the case is assigned to detectives Robert McKay in Henderson, Adam Olmsted in St. George.
Close enough to hurt, close enough to know. Everybody's talking but they never say so. If the ring keeps shrinking till it fits your lie, I'll be the last one looking you in the eye.
They start close to Steven. One of the first people they speak with is his employer, Travis Hansen. He says he paid Steven $100 about a week before he disappeared. One question keeps coming up. Was Steven working in Henderson? According to Hansen, no. The business operated in St. George and the surrounding area. No jobs in Henderson, no clients in Vegas. Even though flyers were found in Steven's car, none were ever delivered to houses in Sun City Anthem. If Steven was in that neighborhood, it wasn't for work. Still circling those close to Steven, investigators speak with his former roommate, Jordan Zirkle. Steven and Jordan came from very different worlds. Jordan was more laid back. He liked to drink a few beers, smoke a bit of marijuana. Steven didn't. It doesn't seem like the kind of pairing that would work. But according to Jordan, it did. They got along fine, even played softball together. When Jordan talks about him, he describes someone friendly, positive, easy to be around. Jordan had already moved out before Steven went missing. He says it was because of issues with the landlord. Before leaving, He gives Steven $100 just to help him out. Police say he was cooperative, answered their questions, open, truthful. He was never considered a suspect. That covers Jordan. The landlord is next. Investigators continue with his landlord, Brett Bishop. He tells police he wasn't pressuring Steven about the back rent, that there were no plans to evict him. He was good for it and would catch up in January. He describes Steven as responsible, reliable, says there was nothing about him that suggested he would just disappear. That sounds reasonable, but some things don't line up. In the days leading up to the disappearance, Bishop had contacted Steven's father. So while he says there wasn't pressure, there was clearly some concern. And remember, the neighbor John, the one who saw Steven pull into the driveway, then leave again? Bishop told Steven's mother, Deanne, that Steven had told that neighbor he was heading to Vegas. The neighbor said that conversation never happened. Around this same time, another voice starts to appear. Brett's wife, Tina. Within days of Steven's disappearance, Tina begins posting about the case online on sites like Slick Deals and Web Sleuths. At first, she shares details about the house, how Steven's room was clean and organized, groceries still sitting there, untouched. At that point, it reads like someone trying to help. Then she mentions something else, that Steven had complained about Jordan stealing his food. Throughout this case, you'll see that Tina likes talking about Jordan a lot. While investigators speak with people in Steven's life, Detective McKay works the neighborhood where Steven was last seen. It's a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where something unusual should stand out. It doesn't. Until one house. Judy, who lived across the street, tells investigators that something caught her attention. She points to a specific address, 2260 Evening Lights, the only house on that street that appeared vacant. It hadn't been empty for long. On the afternoon of December 13th, the same day Steven disappeared, there was strange activity at that home. A large moving truck parked outside. Multiple people going in and out, carrying boxes. The entire move happened over a few hours, then it was over. After that, she never saw the people who lived there again. A white van that had been there during the move was suddenly gone. It didn't return. But even after that, with the main house appearing empty, there was still activity. Cars coming and going at all hours of the day and night. Locals even had a name for it, the odd house on the block.
Hold your breath now, don't look down now, something's waking right below.
With that house standing out, investigators begin trying to make contact. On January 4th, detectives go to 2260 Evening Lights. No one answers. They look through the windows. There's no furniture inside. At first glance, it's empty. But in the driveway, there's a car. A tan Honda Accord. The registration comes back to two names, Maria and Saverio DiMaggio. 2 days later, January 6th, they return. Again, no answer. This time, they leave Steven's missing persons flyer in the door. That same evening, they come back again. The flyer is gone. No one answers the door. Now, there's a different vehicle in the driveway, a white Dodge van, also registered to Maria and Severio. Someone had been there, yet no one made contact. On January 8th, investigators return once more. Still no answer. They leave business cards and a note, asking residents to call them back immediately. Now, I'll be honest, this next part is difficult to make sense of, because on that same day, January 8th, something else happens. Investigators are directed to a desert area not far from Anthem Highlands. The information comes from a tip. With that tip, a name is given: Angela DiMaggio. The caller claims to have information specific enough to point police to a precise location, so they search the area and find nothing. Later, investigators determine there's no Angela DiMaggio connected to that family, no one by that name, which raises a question: who made that call? And how did they know that name connected to that house so early on? Eventually, on January 13th, investigators are finally able to make contact with Severio. By that point, he's no longer living at 2260 Evening Lights. He and his wife had already moved out in November to a new address just a few minutes away. That explains part of it, the empty house, but it doesn't explain everything, because according to Severio, someone was still living on the property: his son, Mark. He tells investigators that Mark had been staying in the small casita just at the front of the property, which is interesting because the front door of the casita faces the front door of the home. If someone was staying there, they would have seen the police, the knocking, the flyer at the door. Severio tells investigators he doesn't recognize Steven. As for the flyer, he says the only one he ever saw was the one left at the mailbox of his new home. He says he hadn't been back to the house on Evening Lights, but the flyer left at 2260 had been removed. If it wasn't Severio, it had to be someone else.
You keep on moving side to side, words like smoke, no place to hide. I can feel it in the seams, shifty hands and missing seams. 2 points for honesty.
It took time to get to Mark, not a day or two, weeks. He didn't sit down with them until February 18th, 2010. Long enough for things to settle, or disappear, depends how you look at it. When they finally do talk to him, Mark says plenty, yet somehow nothing at all. They show him Steven's photo, ask if he's seen him. Most people would give a yes or no answer. Mark doesn't seem to care for either.
I can't say that I've seen him.
It wasn't just that. Police ask whether Steven might have approached him looking for work.
That didn't happen.
When the conversation stays on routine things, he seems calm, comfortable. But when it turns to Steven, or to where he's been staying, that changes. He becomes evasive, especially when asked where he was actually living. He says he used to live in the casita, that he still stayed there sometimes, that he'd been thinking about moving back in. But when pressed on where he was living, in February of 2010, he doesn't give them an address. Instead, he says he doesn't tell people where he lives, that he doesn't trust people because of the drug lifestyle people tend to have, which isn't an answer. And when pressed further for an address, he doesn't give one, just a P.O. box in Pahrump.
Log off, I said I'd sleep, but your little blue bubble keeps tapping me. One more tab, one more.
And while all this is going on, Tina is still posting. At one point, she says that Brett and Steven had talked a few days before he disappeared, that they had worked something out, a plan for Steven to catch up on rent. But when you look at the call records, there's nothing there. No calls, no back and forth. And that's where it gets interesting. Because on December 10th, Steven shows up near Orem, right where Brett and Tina are living. There's a receipt placing him there at a Flying J just off the I-15. So, if that conversation happened, it couldn't have happened over the phone and had to have happened in person. And then, Tina explains what happens next. She says they tried to get a hold of him, that he wasn't answering, but that it's not unusual for someone who's behind on rent to stop picking up the phone. So she says they decided to drive down to St. George to see if he'd moved out. But when you go back and look at the call records, there are none. Not until December 13th at 4:36 p.m. A call or text from the landlord, and that's it. So after Steven doesn't respond one time, they get in the car and drive 4 hours to check on him. There's a lot of miles in this case and not a lot of clarity. That's the sequence. And this is the part I keep coming back to. Tina is posting away about how her husband and Steven had worked out an arrangement for the back rent that he would pay in January. But if this were true, why are they reaching out again just a couple days later, asking about rent? As time goes on, Tina's posts start to change. There's more of them, more detail, and more focus on Jordan. At first, it's small things. She mentions that he moved out just before Steven disappeared, that he hadn't paid rent, that he left marijuana behind, that he changed the doorknob on his bedroom door. Which is interesting, considering she also talks about peeking into Steven's room more than once. But then it starts to build. She suggests that maybe Jordan was involved in something, that he could have set Steven up, and then it escalates. She casually says that an Orem police officer told her that Jordan was one of the biggest drug dealers in St. George. At one point, she even posts his criminal record online. Small, petty charges, the kind that only matter when you need them to. As Tina continues her flurry of posts, investigators are still trying to figure out where in the world Mark actually lived, because the only thing he gave them was that P.O. box. So they look into it, and they find Mark isn't just tied to one place. He's connected to multiple out in Pahrump. On one hand, he's claiming to live in a 250 square foot casita. On the other, he's tied to 4 properties. Some of those properties aren't really places someone lives. 2 of them are vacant lots. Those vacant properties really are excellent places to hide things. Another address is on Galley Road. Police speak to a woman living there. They show her Steven's photo. She says he looks familiar, but she can't say why or from where. Just familiar. And despite all of this, despite the number of properties, the uncertainty, police didn't go out to Pahrump right away. They waited months until April 27th. And by then, whatever might have been there may have been long gone.
Before you said it was nothing, just a slip of the tongue, but the whole room caught fire, and I was the one. I was the one. Dust and blood.
Now let's get back to roommate Jordan for a moment. Because by this point, Tina has said quite a bit. That he wasn't a good person, that he'd left quickly, that he may have even arranged for Steven to meet someone. It's a very specific picture, but Jordan has a few things to say about the Bishops as well. According to Jordan, he met Brett through a newspaper ad. The house was listed as a kind of vacation rental. Someone was needed to look after the property. But when he moved in, whatever passed for normal there didn't last.
I get to the house and I literally walk in the front door. There was like literally 100 guns in the living room. They were all laid out like he had them, and then he was loading them.
It wasn't just that. There were parts of the house he wasn't allowed to access. The garage, the master bedroom.
But when I moved into the house, I had no access to the garage or the bedroom, but I had access to the whole house. Well, I came home from work one day early, and the garage door was open, and that's when I seen the Porsche.
And Brett didn't exactly keep a routine.
Brett used to show up at the house, like, at random times of night, like 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. Like, we'd be, like, just show up out of the blue. Like, he's only supposed to be there, like, twice a year, but this dude was literally coming, like, all the time. Like, he'd just show up out of the blue, like, at the weirdest times, and he would always be in a different car, and then he would leave, and he would go spend days and hours upon hours out at the Arizona Strip.
But one thing did stay consistent.
Like, so Brett used to carry, you know, like those leather shower bags. Like, if you travel, you have those little, like, carry-on travel bags. And Brett used to carry one of those filled with pills, and how I knew it was pills is every time he would walk, you could hear them fucking things in the bottles.
Then there were the trips.
And he would always be in a different car, and then he would leave, and he would go spend days and hours upon hours out at the Arizona Strip. He would always rent Jeeps, Hummers, all that stuff from rental companies. Like, he never brought the family to the house the whole time I lived there. Like, I never met any of his kids, his wife, none of that.
Eventually, it all becomes too much. He leaves.
If you want to know how I moved out of that house, I took all my stuff at like 1, 2 o'clock in the morning one night, and then I snuck out the fucking window of that house. That's how I moved out of that house. I didn't tell no one. I just left that fucking house because Brett was sketchy, show up at random times of an hour. He was a weird dude.
And at first, some of what Jordan describes sounds like a stretch. Until you learn that as Tina posted about Jordan, her own husband was being investigated for the very same things, and then some.
Caught red-handed, you threw the first stone. And glass houses, and now it all shows.
It started with the Porsche. Back in 2005, a silver Porsche Cayenne Turbo is stolen from the front display of a dealership in Scottsdale, Arizona. 4 years later, in August of 2009, police in Orem, Utah, receive an anonymous tip. If they're looking for a silver Porsche SUV, they might want to check the garages at 2 properties. One of them, 1734 Maplewood Way, the same address where Steven had rented his room. Both properties are tied to Brett Bishop. After speaking with neighbors who say they've seen the vehicle there, police obtain a warrant. On August 6, 2009, they enter the garage. Inside is the Porsche. When they peel back the VIN, it leads straight back to the one stolen out of Arizona. We can't say whether Brett stole the car himself or whether he purchased it from the person who did. But what we can say is that when questioned, Brett claimed he bought the Porsche from a man named TJ. When asked for the full name, he says, Tom Jones. Funnily enough, Tom Jones just so happened to share the exact same birthday as Brett. It's not just the car in the garage. Police find license plates from multiple states: Arizona, Nevada, Kentucky, Utah. In a cupboard, marijuana, just a small amount. Alongside it, scales, pipes, rolling papers, seeds, and a California medical cannabis card in Brett Bishop's name. They also find numerous firearms, ammunition, and a homemade silencer attached to a .22 handgun. Neighbors would later say that they suspected something wasn't right. The Porsche had been there for years, and yet it was never driven. At the time, Brett was working for a closed-door pharmacy, not open to the public. Medications were prepared in bulk, then delivered to hospitals, retirement homes, and care facilities. It was part of his job to handle those medications, track them, prepare them, deliver them, which meant he had access to large quantities of prescription drugs every day. And inside that same garage, police find prescription bottles, not in his name, pain medication, sedatives, muscle relaxers, many of them traced back to patients in care facilities. And according to his employer, there was no legitimate reason for those medications to be stored at his home. Not exactly the kind of things that just end up in a garage by accident. Around that same time, the pharmacy itself had received an anonymous warning about a delivery driver stealing medication. During this, Tina's still online, not just sharing details, but starting to explain what she thinks happened. She keeps coming back to Sacramento.
I wonder if Jordan has any ties to Sacramento. Pot is legal there, isn't it? Medically?
Which is interesting, considering that's not exactly unfamiliar territory in her own home. She suggests Steven may have been sleeping in his car, something Brett had done himself, on business trips, traveling with a bag, blankets, a pillow, the same things that were found in Steven's car. And from there, the outline takes shape.
It seems like he knew someone there and was meeting them at noon.
In her version, Steven wasn't just driving, he was going somewhere specific. To meet someone, pulled into something he didn't fully understand. A situation involving drugs. It's a complete explanation, just not one that points anywhere near her. But what if she's not entirely wrong? What if Steven was meeting someone? Because this doesn't feel random. The location, it's not the kind of place you just end up in. Sun City Anthem isn't on the way to anything. It's not just off a main road. And there's no reason to pass through it, unless you're going there on purpose. In the footage, there's a moment where Steven slows down, just before a speed bump, almost like he already knows it's there. When he parks, it's slightly off, more like how you'd park for a quick stop, rather than a long visit. Then there's the timing. He sits there for 6 minutes until exactly noon. Not around noon, not close, exactly. Just like you would if you were waiting for an appointment. When you zoom out and look at the past few days, that precision starts to stand out. He spends hours driving, but his stops are very brief. In Overton, he's only there for around 10 minutes. Just enough time to get in and out. It doesn't feel random. It almost feels scheduled, like he had somewhere to be, or more likely, someone to meet. And if that's true, Then the odd house in that neighborhood stops feeling like a coincidence.
This is where it starts. This is where it stops. In the center of the frame, while the heavy engine slowly forgets.
2260 Evening Lights. The house neighbors couldn't quite explain. People coming and going at all hours. A moving truck that shows up and is gone within hours. The evasive man staying there, Mark DiMaggio. But it's what's found later, after the house sits vacant, that raises different kinds of questions. By that point, neighbors are suspicious enough to go looking for answers themselves. One of them slips inside, takes photos that are later given to a private investigator. Inside the casita, the condition is alarming. The walls are covered in holes, not small damage, repeated impact in multiple places. Walls, doors, the kind of damage that makes you stop and ask, what the hell happened in there? The scene starts to line up with other things Tina had been suggesting. Drugs. When Steven's car is found, police brought in drug dogs, but they didn't hit on anything. What if they were the wrong kind of dogs? Most of them aren't trained to detect prescription medications. Suddenly, Mark DiMaggio feels a lot more relevant. In his police interview, Mark admits to being on heavy painkillers. Around the time Steven disappeared, he says he wasn't himself. Reports at the time link him to violence and other drug-related incidents. Not isolated, a pattern, moving from state to state, often after trouble with the law. California, Florida, Nevada. So when you look at that casita, the damage inside, the traffic neighbors described, it doesn't feel random. It feels like something may have happened there. So now you've got Steven, maybe a little naive, not exactly the kind of person you'd expect to be mixed up in this. And he's living with and owes money to a man already tied to stolen prescription drugs, a stolen car, and a firearm fitted with the silencer. Then he disappears after days of driving in quick stops, not out in the desert, in a quiet retirement community, just steps away from a casita that looks like it was torn apart from the inside, with a man staying there who admits he was on heavy painkillers at the time. Is it random? A coincidence? Or is it multiple things lining up in the exact same place at the exact same time? In the end, when it comes to Brett Bishop, the case against him fell apart. The search warrant was challenged. So, most of what was found in that garage was never allowed in court. As for Mark, there simply wasn't enough probable cause to search 2260 Evening Lights while he was living there, or any of the other properties tied to him. Later, investigators do try to go back, but by then, the house had already been sold, and the new owners decline a cadaver dog search. So whatever happened there stays there. Police searched the surrounding desert multiple times, with dogs, helicopters, and for a long time, before I really looked into this case, I thought that's where he was. That maybe the pressure was too much for Steven. That he'd gone out into the desert. That maybe he didn't want his family to find his body. But there's one small thing that completely changed my mind. When Steven parked his car and got out after sitting there for those 6 minutes, right there at that exact spot, if he turns right, he's in the desert immediately. If that were his plan, it was right there. But he doesn't go right. And after that, there's nothing. I don't think Steven ever left Sun City Anthem. In fact, I don't think he ever left Evening Lights at all.
It's a quiet street where the pavement ends and the shadows meet at the edge of the glass, watching the 6 minutes pass. The air is heavy, the house is still, a vacant stare, a frozen will against the hill. This is where it starts. This is where